Hey, it's April, and today I'm going to be making a magical scarecrow. I actually created this one for a friend of mine. He described the character and this is the design I came up with, taking inspiration from the Wizard of Oz universe and Tim Burton's characters, mainly Victor. To prep the doll, I'm removing the factory paint with acetone, boiling the head, removing the head, and peeling off the plastic hair. Now we have a nice clean base to work on. First, I'm going to cut some big eye holes. Then reshape his face with some Apoxie Sculpt. I want his eyes to be deep set and bulgy, so I need to build up an area around the holes to make sure they've got plenty of room to sink into. I'm also giving him a little pointy nose. And elongating his chin. Push 2 clay blobs through the back of his head for the eyes, giving them a really good squish so they don't fall out. Now for some hair. Since he's made of wood, I'm adding some little clay wormies to his legs to hopefully look like stray branches. After what felt like an eternity of sanding, he's finally ready for some acrylic paint. I'm painting a wooden texture on his limbs, but since he has a very sort of animated feel, I wanted to try and create a more graphic stylized wood grain. Now back to the face. You really do have to trust the process with this style, as he does look mildly terrifying at the moment. Sketch the face with some watercolour pencils and blush with soft pastels. I'm adding some more wood grain, but keeping it really subtle so I don't overwhelm his face. He has a really soft, shy personality, so I don't want anything too intense, it just won't feel right. Blend the paint out with some more blush in. And finish with gloss varnish on the eyes. Now let's make him some clothes. I made a simple cotton shirt, but the fabric looks too new and flat, so I need to add some acrylic paint. I'm covering the shirt in a diluted cream colour. It's only a subtle difference, but the finished result will look more worn and a bit more natural. And once it's dried, I can add some lace into the chest area with some red anchor thread. I also made some little trousers. I couldn't find the colour that I wanted, so I chose this as a base, and then I can easily change it with some acrylic paints. I used 2 different shades so that they don't look too flat. Then glued on some little patches I painted. And finished with some blue stitching on the corners. Next up, his big raggedy coat. I made the base out of a cotton fabric, and then I'm going to customise it with paint. I'm using a darker brown to add depth to the shoulders, the holes and the edges. I then glued on some colourful overlays. And covered the whole thing in lots of paint splatters. I'm also adding some thread to the shoulders so it looks like they've ripped and he's had to stitch them back together. For his belt, I cut out the pattern pieces from some fake leather and then glued them together with Fabri-Tac. Added some details with gold paint. Glued a gold ring to the thinnest strap. Quick check that it fits. And lace it up with some red thread, and then glue the buckle in place. To make his boots, I cut the top off the sliders he came with. Made some long leather socks with extra long toe parts. pulled them over the plastic soles, cut out 2 more leather pieces, and then laced them up with more red thread over the sock parts. Last up, he needs a big hat. To attach the pieces, I'm gluing the brim tabs to the inside of the top piece. Then gluing the top tabs onto the brim. Pull the gather threads to give the top part a nice ruched curly shape. Then glue down a wider brim on top of the lower one. I did this in 2 separate pieces so that I can iron the torn parts over the lower brim, and then that way they'll hang down rather than sticking straight out and looking a bit weird. Same as with the coat, I'm using a darker brown paint to highlight the holes, edges and creases. And then gluing on a red trim. Looking good, but it's still missing some leaves. So I made a template, cut out a bunch of cotton pieces and painted them with acrylics. I went for 3 different colour schemes, so there's some nice variation, but kept them all autumnal. And then glue them to the hat. I also added 3 of them to some thread to make a little leaf chain, and then attached that to the inside of his trousers. At this point, I realised the fabrics were still looking a little flat and plain, so I went in with some more paint, mainly adding darker crease lines and a few little highlights. You'll probably also notice that I switched out the belt. I used the exact same method but with a wider base, so this time the lacing's actually visible. And finally, I'm going to add the remaining leaves to his shirt and jacket. Now that the outfit's complete, all that's left to make are his accessories, starting with some little potions. I found these tiny jars intended for a dollhouse. I mean, seriously, how cute are these though? I absolutely love the Chupa Chups one. It's so cute. Empty a couple of them out, and then fill it with some UV resin. Mix in some blue paint, and lots of glitter, because obviously sparkles means magic, right? And then cure under the UV lamp. I also made a smaller version in a slightly different shade so that it looks like he's got 2 different potions, and then painted the corks to match the rest of his outfit. I made a little leather pouch for them to sit in. I didn't record the process, but it was basically the same as the belt. I cut out the pieces, glued them together, attached rings and studs, and then finished with acrylic paint. And then I can just glue it straight onto his belt. I twisted together some wire to make the base shape of his staff, and then covered the whole thing in Apoxie Sculpt. Add some gnarled wood texturing to make it look, well, to make it look like wood, hopefully. And I also added a magnet into the top part and then wrapped some more epoxy around it so that it looks like part of the staff. And then paint with acrylics. I would normally use a wash for the shadows, but since everything else has really graphic lines, I thought it would be best to stick with that style. Brighten it up with some dry brushing. And it's ready for a crystal. I rolled up a lumpy ball of foil and then wrapped that in transparent Worbla. Peeled out the foil before it fully cooled down. And then reheated so I can close the seam. And then glued it into place on the staff. I'm using Citadel's Contrast paints to make the blue colour. I know it's not their intended use, but I thought that because of the consistency, it would work really well regardless. I then coated it in lots of glitter and shimmer for maximum sparkles. I'm also adding some blue paint and glitter to the staff to try and create the illusion of magic dust from casting spells, and also I simply thought it'd look cool. Coat with resin and cure under the UV lamp. After a couple more coats of glitter and resin, I am really pleased with the outcome. I absolutely love it, so much so that I now feel the urge to make a human-sized one. Final thing I need to make are his little moth friends. I made a paper template, split into separate wings, cut the pieces out of Worbla, glued them together, placing one body piece on top and one underneath. That way I can fill in the gap later with some resin. I also glued a magnet to the base, then heated it up and kept bending until the shape looked nice and fluid. I coloured in blue using the same method as the crystal, but with some standard acrylic paints for the accents. I also made another one in a yellow gold colour scheme. One for his staff, and one for the magnet in his coat. And with that, he's finished. Let's check out the result. This is definitely the longest I've spent on one doll, but I'm so glad I did because I absolutely love this little dude so much. Thanks for watching, and if you want to see more of my characters come to life, hit that subscribe button. See you next time.